Shirley Temple. Bright eyes. The skepticism in the room was thick. Sure, Shirley Temple was already a familiar face in Hollywood by 1934, but could a 6-year-old truly carry an entire film? That was the lingering doubt when she auditioned for Bright Eyes. And Shirley? She didn't just dispel their concerns, she tap danced right over them. She didn't just recite lines, she performed. At one point, she broke into an impromptu tap routine, her tiny shoes clicking against the floor with effortless rhythm. The casting team sat in stunned silence. Not only could she dance, but she had a magnetic charm that made it impossible to look away. Even more impressive, she could memorize lines at lightning speed, delivering them with comedic timing that some seasoned actors struggled to master. By the time she finished, any doubts the producers had were gone. Shirley landed the role, and when Bright Eyes hit theaters later that year, it was a sensation. But the real star wasn't just the film, it was her. Her performance of On the Good Ship Lollipop became one of the most iconic musical numbers of the decade, and the film cemented her as Hollywood's biggest child star. The little girl who walked into that audition, hoping to prove herself, walked out with a career that would define an era. Marlon Brando, A Streetcar Named Desire. It's 1947, and a young Marlon Brando steps into a modest apartment in New York City. The place belongs to Tennessee Williams, the celebrated playwright behind A Streetcar Named Desire. Brando isn't dressed to impress, just his usual casual look, but what happens next is the stuff of Hollywood legend. Elia Kazan, the play's director, had his doubts. Brando was only 23, too young, too untested. But Williams insisted Kazan give him a shot. Then, before reading a single line, Brando did something unexpected. He fixed a blown fuse in the apartment, just like that, no hesitation. As if he was Stanley Kowalski, the rough working-class brute at the heart of Streetcar. At least that's how Brando later told the story in his autobiography. No one else seems to have written about it, but it certainly adds to the myth. Then came the reading. Brando didn't just recite the lines, he lived them. His voice was raw, his movements unpredictable. Kazan was stunned. Williams, watching from the sidelines, barely let him finish before declaring, "You have the part." Just like that, a legend was born. But Brando hesitated. He later admitted in his memoir that he nearly turned it down, thinking the role was too big for him. He even tried to call Kazan to back out, but the line was busy. That tiny twist of fate kept him from saying no. The next day, Kazan called him instead. "Well, what is it? Yes or no?" Brando gulped and said, "Yes." That yes changed everything. His performance as Stanley Kowalski, both on stage and later in the 1951 film adaptation, didn't just make him a star, it redefined acting. Brando's raw, unfiltered intensity was unlike anything audiences had seen before. It was the birth of method acting in mainstream Hollywood, a performance so visceral that it left an entire generation of actors scrambling to catch up. And to think, it all started with a blown fuse and a fateful phone call. Audrey Hepburn, Roman Holiday. A young Audrey Hepburn stood under the blinding studio lights, nerves hidden beneath her effortless poise. It was 1951, and director William Wyler was searching for the perfect Princess Anne for Roman Holiday. The studio wanted an established star, but Wyler had a hunch. Instead of a standard reading, he asked Hepburn to improvise. She didn't hesitate. With a mix of innocence and charm, she played along, her expressive eyes telling a story beyond the script. Wyler was captivated. Years later, he recalled, "She had this wonderful childlike quality that made her perfect." Still, Paramount executives weren't convinced. She was virtually unknown, with only a few minor roles under her belt. The Secret People had been filmed but wouldn't release until the following year. But Wyler wasn't the only one who believed in her. Gregory Peck, already cast as the film's leading man, saw something special too. He reportedly told the studio, "You'd better put her name above the title because she's going to win an Oscar for this." And he was right. When Roman Holiday premiered in 1953, Hepburn's performance enchanted audiences and critics alike, earning her an Academy Award for Best Actress. Practically overnight, she became Hollywood royalty. That improvised moment in a screen test didn't just land her the role, it launched one of the most iconic careers in film history. James Dean, East of Eden. When James Dean walked into his audition for East of Eden in 1954, he didn't look like Hollywood's next big star. He slouched, mumbled, and barely made eye contact. Nothing like the polished actors studios were used to. But director Elia Kazan wasn't looking for polished. He wanted raw, unpredictable energy, and Dean had it in spades. Kazan needed someone who could embody Cal Trask, a troubled young man desperate for his father's approval. When Dean read for the role, he didn't just perform, he was Cal. Kazan later described Dean as having an intensity that felt almost dangerous, something that made him mesmerizing on screen. Even John Steinbeck, who wrote East of Eden, was reportedly struck by how much Dean resembled his character, though the exact words attributed to him remain debated. Dean wasn't the only actor considered. Paul Newman also auditioned, bringing his signature charm and classical training, but Kazan saw something in Dean that Newman couldn't replicate, a restless, almost volatile presence. From the moment Dean was cast, his unconventional methods clashed with his co-stars. Raymond Massey, who played his father, grew increasingly frustrated with Dean's improvisations and refusal to stick to the script. Kazan, however, saw this tension as a gift, letting it fuel the film's strained father-son dynamic. Off-screen, Dean's personal life was just as tumultuous. His relationship with actress Pier Angeli reportedly ended during filming, and some speculate that his heartbreak bled into his performance, making Cal's desperation feel painfully real. Whether true or not, the result was undeniable. Dean's portrayal was electric. When East of Eden hit theaters in 1955, Dean became an overnight sensation. Critics were divided. Some called his performance brilliant, others thought it was too raw. But Hollywood took notice. Dean earned a posthumous Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, making history as the first actor to receive such an honor after his passing. That audition, the mumbling, the fidgeting, the refusal to play by the rules wasn't a mistake. It was James Dean being James Dean. And that, more than anything, is what made him unforgettable. Marilyn Monroe, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Marilyn Monroe's audition for Gentlemen Prefer Blondes wasn't just a test, it was a fight for her future. In 1952, 20th Century Fox executives had their doubts. They wanted Betty Grable for Lorelei Lee. She was a proven star, but her salary was sky high. Monroe, still on the rise, was a cheaper gamble. The problem? The studio wasn't convinced she had the talent to carry a major musical. Determined to prove them wrong, Monroe stepped into her audition and transformed into Lorelei. Instead of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, she performed Bye Bye Baby, delivering a performance so mesmerizing that even the skeptics took notice. Director Howard Hawks had already worked with her on Monkey Business and saw her potential, but studio head Darryl F. Zanuck, he wasn't sold. Hawks knew Monroe needed an edge. He pushed for Jane Russell to co-star, arguing that Russell's established presence would balance Monroe's inexperience. The strategy worked. With Russell on board, the studio finally relented, and Monroe secured the role that would cement her as Hollywood's ultimate blonde bombshell. When Gentlemen Prefer Blondes hit theaters in 1953, Monroe wasn't just a star, she was an icon. That pink satin gown, that effortless mix of innocence and seduction, it became the gold standard for Hollywood glamour. And to think if not for a single audition, it might never have happened. Humphrey Bogart, the Maltese Falcon. George Raft had a knack for dodging roles that could have made him an even bigger star. In 1941, Warner Brothers wanted him as Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon, but Raft hesitated, just as he had with High Sierra earlier that same year. That hesitation opened the door for Humphrey Bogart, who was still typecast as a second-tier gangster. Director John Huston, making his directorial debut, knew Bogart's potential from their previous collaboration and arranged for him to read opposite Mary Astor. The chemistry was electric. Bogart's Spade wasn't just tough, he was sharp, sardonic, and unpredictable. Huston knew he had his lead. The film became a cornerstone of the film noir genre, and Bogart? This role turned him into a legend, paving the way for Casablanca, The Big Sleep, and an entire era of Hollywood history. Elizabeth Taylor, National Velvet. 12-year-old Elizabeth Taylor stepped into MGM's casting office in 1943 determined to prove she was the perfect velvet brown. But the producers hesitated. She was too small, too delicate. Could she even handle the demands of a horse-riding role? Taylor didn't argue. Instead, she threw herself into rigorous equestrian training, determined to master every aspect of the sport. By the time she returned for a final audition, she wasn't just acting, she was Velvet. That unwavering dedication won her the part, and when National Velvet hit theaters in 1944, it launched her from a promising child actress to a bona fide Hollywood star. While some legends claim the studio still had doubts even after casting her, Taylor's performance silenced any skepticism. The film's success cemented her place in Hollywood, setting the stage for a career that would span decades. Frank Sinatra, From Here to Eternity. Frank Sinatra's career was in free fall by the early 1950s. His records weren't selling, his film career had flatlined, and Columbia Pictures had all but written him off. But he had one shot at redemption, the role of Angelo Maggio in From Here to Eternity. The problem? Studio head Harry Cohn didn't want him anywhere near it. Desperate to prove himself, Sinatra fought for an audition. According to some accounts, his then-wife, Ava Gardner, may have nudged the right people behind the scenes, though whether that actually influenced Cohn remains up for debate. What's certain is that Sinatra finally got his chance, and when he stepped into that audition room, he knew it was now or never. Director Fred Zinnemann later recalled being blown away by Sinatra's raw, gut-wrenching performance. Burt Lancaster, who starred in the film, believes Sinatra's personal struggles bled into his portrayal of Maggio, making it all the more powerful. He wasn't just playing a desperate soldier, he was living it. Sinatra landed the role accepting a meager $8,000 salary, a fraction of what he once commanded, but the gamble paid off. When From Here to Eternity hit theaters in 1953, critics raved about his performance. The New York Post reportedly praised his portrayal as both authentic and deeply moving. And then came the ultimate validation, an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. That Oscar didn't just sit on his shelf, it resurrected his entire career. Soon after, he signed with Capitol Records and launched a legendary comeback. As for the persistent whispers that the Mafia strong-armed the studio into casting him, director Fred Zinnemann dismissed them outright, calling the Godfather-style tale pure fiction. Sinatra didn't need muscle to win the role, just the performance of a lifetime. Bette Davis, of Human Bondage. The studio wasn't convinced. Bette Davis didn't fit their vision for Mildred Rogers in Of Human Bondage. Too unconventional, too intense. But director John Cromwell saw something in her. Determined to prove she had the fire for the role, Davis delivered an audition so raw, so unvarnished, that even the most skeptical executives took notice. According to some accounts, her reading wasn't polished Hollywood glamour, it was jagged, visceral, almost uncomfortable to watch. Rumors suggest that by the time she finished, the room was silent, the weight of her performance sinking in. Cromwell fought for her, and the studio reluctantly agreed. What followed was a career-defining performance. Critics raved, with the New York Times calling her portrayal a revelation. The film not only earned Davis her first major acclaim, but also set her on a path to becoming one of Hollywood's most fearless actresses, forever shattering the mold of the traditional leading lady. Gene Kelly, For Me and My Gal. In 1941, Gene Kelly walked into MGM's audition room with everything to prove. He was already a Broadway star, but Hollywood wasn't convinced he could carry a film. When he laced up his tap shoes and launched into a routine, every eye in the room was locked on him. His footwork was sharp, his energy undeniable, but dancing alone wouldn't land him the lead in For Me and My Gal. The real challenge? Proving he could act. MGM executives weren't entirely sold, but Kelly had one major advantage: Judy Garland. She was already a box office powerhouse, and she personally pushed for Kelly to be cast. Rumors swirl that Garland's endorsement tipped the scales, convincing MGM to take a chance on the Broadway newcomer. When the two finally shared the screen, their chemistry was effortless, and Kelly got the role. The film premiered in 1942, marking Kelly's Hollywood debut. It wasn't just a hit, it was a launch pad. Within a decade, he was headlining Singin' in the Rain and An American in Paris, reshaping the movie musical with his athletic, expressive style. Kelly didn't just transition from stage to screen, he set a new standard for what a musical star could be. Charlton Heston, The Ten Commandments. Cecil B. DeMille needed a commanding presence to play Moses in The Ten Commandments, someone who could part the Red Sea with sheer conviction. Charlton Heston had the look, the stature, the booming voice, but DeMille wasn't sold just yet. He wanted to see if Heston could embody the weight of a prophet. According to some accounts, Heston's audition wasn't a typical script reading. Instead of reciting lines from the film, he reportedly delivered passages with the gravitas of a biblical leader. Whether it was scripture or a monologue chosen to impress, his voice filled the room with such authority that DeMille, a man known for his theatrical instincts, was captivated. While stories of DeMille dramatically declaring, "There is your Moses," may be Hollywood legend, one thing is certain: Heston left no doubt that he was the right choice. The role didn't just make him a star, it cemented him as the face of historical epics, leading to Ben-Hur, El Cid, and a legacy of larger-than-life performances. Grace Kelly, High Noon. John Ford had seen it all. The grizzled director had worked with Hollywood's toughest leading men, from John Wayne to Henry Fonda. So when Grace Kelly, a rising star fresh off High Noon 1952, auditioned for Mogambo, Ford wasn't convinced. She was elegant, sure, but could she hold her own opposite Clark Gable and Ava Gardner? Kelly's screen test needed to be more than just poised. It had to be magnetic. Under the studio lights, she delivered a performance that balanced sophistication with raw emotion. When the reel stopped rolling, Ford reportedly turned to the MGM brass and said, "She has breeding, quality, and class." Whether he actually said those exact words remains debated, but one thing was clear, she had secured the role. The part had originally been meant for Gene Tierney, who had to step down due to health concerns. Filming in Africa was brutal. Kelly later told columnist Hedda Hopper that the conditions were miserable, scorching heat, primitive accommodations, and endless logistical nightmares. Even Clark Gable, the seasoned veteran, was impressed by how she handled it. And then there were the rumors. Whispers of a brief romance between Kelly and Gable. Some claim it was nothing more than friendly admiration, while others insist it was a full-blown affair. The truth? Likely lost to time. When Mogambo premiered in 1953, Kelly's performance turned heads. She won a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actress, and suddenly, Hollywood saw her as more than just a pretty face. Alfred Hitchcock took notice, casting her in Rear Window and To Catch a Thief. By the time she won an Oscar for The Country Girl, she was a full-fledged Hollywood icon. But perhaps the most unexpected twist? That newfound stardom led her to the Cannes Film Festival in 1955, where she met Prince Rainier III of Monaco. Less than a year later, she left Hollywood behind for the life of a princess. One audition, one screen test, and a single director's approval had set the course for a real-life fairy tale. Sidney Poitier, No Way Out. It was 1949, and Sidney Poitier stepped into an audition room with nothing but raw determination. He was reading for No Way Out, a film that didn't shy away from racial tensions, bold territory for its time. But the audition was a disaster. Poitier, a former dishwasher with no formal training, stumbled over his lines. His delivery was stiff, his nerves obvious. By all accounts, he should have been dismissed. But director Joseph L. Mankiewicz saw something else, an authenticity that couldn't be taught. Instead of rejecting him, Mankiewicz took a chance, coaching Poitier through the performance, pulling out the quiet intensity that would become his signature. The gamble worked. Sidney landed the role of Dr. Luther Brooks, becoming one of the first black leading men in a major Hollywood film. His performance was electric, forcing audiences to confront racism in ways they hadn't before. The film opened doors, leading to more roles, bigger opportunities. And while it would take 14 years before he won an Oscar for Lilies of the Field, that shaky audition in 1949 was the moment Hollywood first glimpsed the legend he would become. Judy Garland, The Wizard of Oz. Judy Garland was 16 in 1938 when she stepped into MGM's audition room, hoping to land the role of Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz. But she wasn't the studio's first choice. MGM initially pursued Shirley Temple, the reigning child star, but she was under contract with 20th Century Fox, and negotiations to borrow her collapsed. That left MGM scrambling for a new Dorothy, until Garland's audition changed everything. She didn't just sing over the rainbow, she lived it. Producer Mervyn LeRoy later recalled how her voice carried warmth and poignancy, leaving the executives spellbound. In that moment, they knew they had found their Dorothy. But even after securing the role, Garland wasn't free from scrutiny. At 16, she was caught in an awkward phase. Too old for child roles, too young for adult ones. MGM forced her into a restrictive corset to make her appear younger, a glimpse of the studio's relentless control over her image. Despite the pressures, her performance became legendary. In 1940, she received a special Juvenile Academy Award, solidifying her as one of Hollywood's brightest young stars. The Wizard of Oz became a cinematic classic, but behind the Technicolor magic was a teenager already carrying the weight of fame. Clark Gable, Gone with the Wind. Clark Gable wanted nothing to do with Rhett Butler. When Gone with the Wind was gearing up for production in the late 1930s, Gable dismissed the role as too risky. He wasn't alone. Many in Hollywood doubted the film's ambitious scope. Producer David O. Selznick had his sights set on Gable from the start, but the actor resisted. He wasn't eager to be loaned out by MGM. and he feared the film might flop. Still, Selznick refused to back down. He even sent Gable a copy of Margaret Mitchell's novel hoping to change his mind. But it wasn't the story that swayed him, it was the money. Selznick struck a deal with MGM that sweetened the offer beyond what Gable could refuse. When it came time for the screen test, it was more of a formality than an audition. Gable stepped in front of the camera and it was clear he was Rhett Butler. His effortless charm, commanding presence, and undeniable charisma sealed the deal. The moment his casting was announced, public excitement exploded. The role Gable tried to avoid became the one that defined him. Gone with the Wind shattered box office records, and his portrayal of Rhett Butler remains one of the most iconic performances in film history. Decades later, it's impossible to imagine anyone else delivering that famous smirking farewell. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a... well, you know the rest. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.